Welcome to Game of the Day, where I randomize a date and play a game that came out on that same day. We played today's episode live over on twitch.tv/KingCrown twice and got 1982 for the year with December 21st for the release date. The month was pretty void of confirmed releases, but the closest one was on December 9th with the release of Xevious, which released on Arcade's December 9th, 1982, Sharp X1 May 25th, and PC 8800 series, FM7 November 1st with Commodore 64 128 and Max of 1984, PC 9800 series in 1985, Amstrad CPC, Atari 7800 in 1986, ZX Spectrum, Atari ST, Apple II in 1987, Xbox 360 May 23rd, 2007, and the Wii on January 9th, 2009. A lot of releases. Xevious follows the player as a Sovalu pilot flying over Xevious enemy territory with the goal of destroying their base. You have two attacks, with one of them taking care of aerial combat as flying enemies approach you, and the other for dropping bombs on enemies below that attack you as well. The game did allow you to move in every direction to avoid attacks on screen, but you were only able to get about halfway up the screen before the game's invisible wall stopped you. There were 10 plus different enemies that appear either in the air or on the ground, as well as obstacles such as rotating walls you had to avoid, or else you lost a life, and if you lost all three, it was game over. Fear not though, as you could gain lives if enough enemies were defeated to keep your run going. There was a decent amount of difficulty involved as enemy projectiles sometimes blended into the enemies themselves, and your jet flew rather slow, but nonetheless, once you got into a flow state or memorized the map so you'd know what would come next, you had a pretty good chance of getting through the game. The game also did offer a 2-player mode, but it was just for taking turns beating each other's score opposed to playing together, which was a bit disappointing. While the game was a perfectly fine top-down shooter for the 80s, as well as it was one of the first games in the scroller shooter genre, since it was an arcade title, it wasn't bound to the hardware limitations that consoles were, and it felt like it could have done a bit more, but it just didn't. For example, with the bomb mechanic, its aim was locked to your jet's position instead of being a separate stick to control it, but maybe it was done to make the game's controls a bit easier in the long run. Nonetheless, taking everything into account, I'd have to give this a first flight out of 10. Today we're starting with 1985 for the year and June 12th for the date. The date managed to dodge any releases, but the next closest was June 13th that featured Cauldron and our selected game in Penguin-Kun Wars. Penguin-Kun Wars follows our main character Penguin-Kun in a dodgeball tournament attempting to be the one to rule them all, but the rules are a bit different than you would expect. The main objective is to either have all 10 balls be on your opponent's side or have less balls on your side than your opponent when time expires in a best of 3 set. If you guys manage to both have equal amount of balls on your side when the clock hits 0, it's time for sudden death as more time is added, and it follows the normal rules but adds a bomb that blows up for whoever has it last. To have the best chance of winning though, hitting your opponent with a dodgeball would stun them temporarily, which was a huge help when trying to get quick wins. One other small quirk was that when the clock got to around 20 seconds, a jelly bean would appear that would ricochet any balls that hit it, so you had to be careful around that as well. Unfortunately, the actual tournament itself seemed predetermined, as you would face the same opponents of mouse, panda, koala bear, and a beaver as the final boss. The difficulty definitely ramped up with each opponent as they'd throw the ball quicker, have shorter recovery times, and played smarter, so you really had to lock in on defeating opponents as the tournament progressed. To try and take some of the pressure off after each match though, there is bonus stages you could play to try and add points to your high score. Adding on to the difficulty though, the game definitely had some interesting mechanic choices to make things even harder on the player. For example, sometimes whenever the player was knocked down, there are very few frames, so the computer would often take advantage and continuously stun you before you could even move again, which was a bit frustrating. Another thing was there were more than a couple of occasions where dodging was impossible due to your character moving too slow to get out of the way, which loops back into the previous issue. And finally, while the game did incorporate some level of strategy, after you got to a certain point, outcomes felt a bit more out of control as stage hazards and lucky bounces would often determine how matches went. Once you beat the first tournament, that fact became very apparent as random things would just begin to appear in the next tournament in an attempt to make every match even crazier than the last. This game also featured a 2-player mode, but it just saw both players essentially playing through the same bracket opposed to playing on opposite sides and possibly playing each other in the end. So while this game did have an interesting concept and the ball collision physics seemed pretty solid, it could have benefited from being a bit more balanced and mechanically fleshed out, which gives it a ball to the face out of 10. Today we're starting with 1972 for the year and September 19th for the date, but unfortunately there weren't any games on that date or even in the month, which led us into the game void. The Game Boy is an honorable list that consists of month and year combos without a single game in it, so congratulations to September 1972 for being our 4th entry in the Game Boy. But on our respin, we got March 19th, 2025, which had 98 releases, and the game that landed on was chosen a little like this. Hopefully we catch something good soon. Maybe a dream barbecue or spilled, but who's to say? Well, looks like we got a bite. Steady, steady. Another lint roller, huh? Unfortunate. Well, let me go ahead and release it and put it with the rest of them. Gone fishing. Oh, we finally caught one. Feels like a pretty big one too. Alright, it's definitely a fish, but what kind of fish is it? A fish with names, huh? How peculiar. How peculiar indeed, as the game follows you going to fish in a pond, and whenever you catch a fish, you learn its name, and that's it. When you catch a fish, the credits roll, and there's no more fish to catch. The only other thing in the game is a pillar that reads, "When a fish is named, the world's membrane peels back, exposing raw nerves and secret appetites, rituals, processions, cosmic libations. The show will be a baptism in excess, a descent into the marrow of time itself. The fish know this moment well, or so they say. Catch one and ask what its name is." So, yeah. I'm not really sure what to rate this experience, but yeah. Today we're starting with 2023 for the year and April 13th for the date. We had 76 eligible titles for today's game, but the game that made a grand entrance was Canyon Racer. Canyon Racer is a homebrew or hobbyist title for some interesting consoles such as the Game Boy and Megaduck, which is a Game Boy clone developed in Hong Kong in 1993. But the most interesting thing about this game was the usage of the parallax effect. To put things simply, while some games might have a flat background that moves at the same time and speed, when you incorporate a parallax effect, it allows for a more dynamic background by layering the background elements at different speeds to make the game feel more alive. And to take things a step further, this developer set out not only to do a parallax effect, but make it a vertical one opposed to the normal horizontal ones, which is way more difficult to incorporate for hardware technical reasons. But Canyon Racer follows a ship that flies through a canyon while attempting to avoid rocks that get in your way. You start with 10 lives and you lose one every time you crash, while also having the ability to gain one if you encounter one on your run. But the feature that makes this game unique though is the ability to exchange a life for a save state, allowing you to start your next life from where you last left off. Because such a mechanic exists though, the game counteracts it by making obstacles pretty difficult to avoid, with the only options you have being directional movement and jumping that is determined by how long you hold down the jump button. Due to the game being generated by sine waves, there are some portions that introduce some pretty sharp turns, and if you couldn't master the timing of precise jumps, you're almost forced to use a save state just to brute force past it. But the save states did come with the possibly unintended consequence that since the game's route was fixed, if you knew where certain lives were, you could essentially save before a bunch of lives appeared and then stack them. For example, if you saved at 10 lives, grab 3 more after your save point, then immediately crash, because you only lose a single life, you would now rewind with 12 lives from your previous save point instead of 10. To test the limits of this idea though, I used the technique to reach a max of 99 lives, but was still no match for the difficulty, as I was only able to get up to a high score of 5,400. So while the game was simple objective wise, that was kind of the point, as the game was detective mode to test the limits of the Game Boy, which looking at it on native hardware, it seems to hold up pretty well. With everything taken into account though, I'd have to give this game an impressive sine rewind out of 10. Today we're starting with 1992 for the year and July 26th for the date. Somehow the date had no games on it, but it was sandwiched in between 3 July 25th releases and 2 July 27th ones, so I spun the wheel with those 5 games and got Surprise Nekketsu, New Records, the distant gold medal for today's game, or Crash in the Boys Street Challenge as a localized title. The game follows Todd Thorney IV, defeated after losing a sports tournament in the previous game to Crash Cooney, so he decides to challenge Crash and his friends from Southside High School to another sports tournament, but this time there's no rules involved. The events in this tournament include 400-meter hurdles in which you can hurricane kick your opponent and throw hurdle boards at them, swimming that allows you to fight and attempt to drown your opponent, hammer throwing on a golf course that has different hazards like sand pits, rough patches and ponds, roof jumping across the city with a bolt pole for wide gaps in a unicycle for tight ropes, and street fighting, which sees you managing stamina and trying different special attacks on your opponent. When you start up the game though, you can choose between a full mode of doing every event, a short mode where you pick 3 of them, or a practice mode to get better at a specific one. You were also allowed to play with up to 4 players as the game had 4 different teams to choose from. Each team had 5 players that had different stats such as health, power, speed, and defense, and in between each event you were allowed to pick a new teammate to compete as well as visit the plaza that granted you a bit of help. Alongside a leaderboard to keep track of your placement, there are multiple shots with different focuses such as player help, event boosts, stat boosts, and stat swaps that were available for purchase with the coins you earned depending on where you placed in the event or earned during the event itself. But I did notice stats actually mattered for each player as you could feel the difference in their individual performance as you played. And as a neat touch for events that involved fighting, the damage you took carried over after events, so you had to be cognizant of that as well. The learning curve for the actual games themselves though was pretty steep, as if you wanted a chance you're almost forced to practice, as each event took a ton of skill to master with few shortcuts to help you out, and it didn't help that the computer was pretty good across the board at every event either. Once you got a hang of things though, the game was a ton of fun competing to win the tournament, which was done easiest by winning 3 straight matches in each event or winning 15 matches in a row to ensure you won first place. One last thing I'd like to mention was there were slight differences between the Japanese release and the North American one, but it was mainly asset changes while the gameplay remained the same. The game was great and felt pretty complete all the way through, and apparently 90s audiences felt the same way, as the series has 30 plus installments, so with that being said, I'd have to give this a Golden Street Olympian out of 10. Today we're starting with 1972 for the year and July 19th for the date. Longtime viewers could probably already tell you, but this year and month combo unfortunately landed in the Game Void. The Game Void is an honorable list that consists of month and year combos while a single game in it, so congratulations to July 1972 for being our 5th entry in the Game Void. Upon respinning though, we got October 15th, 1981, which was another miss, but there are 3 games on the previous date to spin, and one of them might be pretty similar to something you've seen before.
So what you playing, son?
Slither.io.
Looks like something I used to play back in the day.
What are you talking about?
Snafu!
Bless you. Now what's the game you're referring to?
The game is
Snafu, which was released by Mattel for the Intellivision. The game's main objective was to be the last snake slithering as you tried not to run into other snakes or your own trail in the process. The way scoring worked was for each snake that got eliminated, all the other snakes were awarded a point, and whatever snake had the most points at the end was the winner. The game featured 16 different game modes that were mainly different variations of movement type, players, obstacles, and permanents. For example, the first game mode featured horizontal and vertical movement with 4 players that have their trails disappear when they lost. Second mode made trails permanent when a snake lost, and the third mode was 2 players with disappearing trails. Other ones allowed you to have diagonal movement, and if you wanted to have everything including obstacles on, you could do that as well, as the game allowed you to mix and match the variations any way you like. And the way the game handled real players versus the computer was pretty impressive, as up to 2 players could play with other snakes being controlled by the CPU, but you could also jump into the game at any time or just sit back and watch the computer control all 4 snakes too if that's what you want to do. Some other neat features the game had was the ability to pick the speed of the snakes, the number of rounds, and showdown music when it came down to the final 2 snakes. And an unexpected quality of life feature that'd speed up the game after the player lost, so they wouldn't have to wait and watch the CPU play for long. One last thing going back to the game modes though is you may have noticed every 4th number was missing, but that was because there was also a second game type called bite games, where the main objective was to bite off your opponent's tail, and whatever snake had no tail left at the end was the loser. While the game's AI wasn't perfect, it was still impressive being one of the first games in the snake genre, and it had a good amount of replay value, so for that I'd give this a Slither.1.0 out of 10. Today we're starting with 1996 for the year and April 20th for the date, where the game we got is best shown by a reenactment of my initial reaction. Okay, we have NBA Hang Time the 15th, Settlers 2 the 16th, Metal Slug and Duke Nukem 3D on the 18th. This month is stacked. There's no way there would be a Man, what the? Polanie is the first real-time strategy game to release in Poland, and it was different, to say the least. The game boots up straight to a Polish menu followed by a 90 CGI intro giving you a bit of story before throwing you into the game. You have different units you can select by either left-clicking on a singular person or dragging across a bunch of them, then right-clicking where you want them to go. The game offered a map that was primarily blacked out at first, but the further you traverse, the more it started to fill in. The units have different jobs such as archers doing long range combat, choppers being builders, knights being fighters, and more. Most times you have a village though as the main base of operations, with everything starting with your town hall that allows you to expand by having enough currency to create more buildings. And you might be wondering, what is the currency used in this game? Is it a point system or an ancient coin? No, it's just cow milk. The most important mechanic in this game comes from the cowshed, as the more cows you have, the more grass they eat, the more milk they produce, which then means the more you can build up your village. While you can build more cow sheds, there's a 3 cow limit per shed, as all the buildings in this game have a built-in resource limit that's indicated on the right side of the screen. For example, in the building for chopper and archer units, you may be able to create 10 of them before the building doesn't let you make any more until that specific building's resource limit refills. Alongside that is the building's health, as you have to fight off invaders, leading us into the game's combat system. While most of the basic units didn't have any special abilities, when you got into more advanced ones like wizards, mages, and druids, they had attacks you could use such as lightning and fireballs they'd either use automatically or you could trigger manually. And once you got close enough to the enemy, you could select which one to focus on for specific troops to make your attack as efficient as possible. In the event your troops got banged up in battle, you did have the ability to heal them by finding altars throughout the lands that would replenish their health. After finishing an area, it was time to move on to the next, as the game featured a conquest-based campaign with 25 different missions that took around 30 minutes each to complete. While there were some small issues like pathfinding when telling units where to go was a bit off sometimes, you couldn't shift select multiple portions of troops at a time, and there wasn't a clear game over scenario, it was still a pretty solid title featuring a speed slider to improve player experience, different mission types to make the gameplay feel fresh, deep strategy elements like ambushing, scouting, unit formations, and even building placement, as well as historical roots, loosely basing the map on 7th century pre-United Poland and having its brooch idols during the cutscene. So with that being said, I'd like to give this game a Polska Roszkosz out of 10. Today we're starting with 2001 for the year and July 27 for the date. Tonpusu was the only game on that date, but here's where things get a little bit interesting. First, the game had no localization, which usually isn't an issue, as I played an entire Japanese visual novel in this series using Google Translate, but it became one when the game was about mahjong, which I have no idea how to play. But once I pulled out the translator, I got even more confused when it asked for a telephone number to connect to the game, which brings us to the next weird part of this game releasing on a console I've never heard of before in the Wonder Swan. Anyways, after finally managing to bypass the telephone issue, the second I was ready to play, the game just froze. So, for the first time in Game of the Day history, we have a specific date that technically has a game, it just simply isn't playable. But according to the rules, I treated it as an empty date and put the next closest games from July 26 and 28 into the wheel for the game we'll be playing for next episode, as it became the longest game I played on this series, as I had to play it for 10 plus hours just to understand it. And the only hint I can give you for what it might be is simply that you'll never see it coming. Unless you got the reference, then you could probably guess the game we got was Persona, a game I wasn't expecting, as we got Shin Megami Tensei, Devil Children, White Book for today's game. This is the third game in the SMT Devil Children series, but as a Japan exclusive, not only did it not get an official translation, there's surprisingly no fan ones either, so I played Black Book first, which released a year earlier, since the gameplay is nearly identical and it had a fan translation, while I used wiki translations in the speedrun of the game to guide me where to go for my White playthrough. But White Book follows Masaki as the main character, who was close friends with Takaharu, and their friendship runs so deep they happen to be born on the same day, but at birth Takaharu was given angel powers while Masaki was given devil ones, and the battle of good and evil started as they're constantly pitted against each other throughout their journeys. To tie the story to the gameplay though, Masaki makes a pact with a demon called Clay that is sworn to protect him as he travels through the Expanse, or basically the realms of hell. As you travel through the Expanse, you come across other demons, as there's 334 of them you can make pacts with and call from bullets in your Devil Riser. Their reactions differ from easily accepting, asking for items or cash in exchange, leaving, or angrily saying no, then boosting their stats. The demon stats in this game range from attack, magic defense, speed, and luck. Demons also came equipped with different moves that either use up mana or health, which is also an interesting addition. But the only way to level up demons in this game leads into the core mechanic of fusing them together. You could either fuse 2 of the same demon to make a stronger version of it, 2 demons to create a new demon, or on rare occasion accidentally have an unintended demon come out from a fusion. But to make which demons you decide to combine matter, you could also choose to inherit traits from the 2 demons you combined into the new demon, which was pretty cool. There's a common, elite, general, and king class in the game, but while the first 3 can be used in the Devil Riser, you needed a King Riser to use any king class demons. In the event one of your demons weren't strong enough and they fainted, you had to pay cash to revive them, which became pretty costly if your entire team managed to wipe out, and as someone who's played a good amount of the mainline Pokemon games, the difficulty is pretty on par or slightly harder than those. Outside of that, the game has some smaller mechanics like a training facility to help demons improve at specific stats, grinding to gain XP as you couldn't summon demons that were below the player's level, ranking up which seemed exclusive to the starter demon, and more. All in all, it was a pretty solid JRPG, but it definitely felt a little confusing, which sounds about right for any game in the SMT series or its spin-offs. For example, while demons did have different typings in this game, it wasn't really explained which ones were super effective against each other, so I was left guessing most of the time. And while the fusion mechanic was great, I would have preferred being able to fuse any demons in my storage opposed to needing them in my Devil Riser, which would have saved me some time constantly transferring between the two. So to recap, after putting 15 hours into Black Book and 5 into White for a total of 20 hours, between the books there are some differences, with the biggest being the ability to ride your starter demons. Fusions to level up non-starter demons was only in White, as well as they added about 90 new demons in White. The score combines into a great book out of 10. Today we're starting with 2003 for the year and July 3rd for the date. There were 3 eligible titles on that date, and the one we got served was Perfect Ace Pro Tournament Tennis. The game features 3 modes consisting of a single match, tournament, and a championship. In single match mode, you can choose between 16 different courts around the world that are either indoor or outdoor and have either a hard, clay, grass, or carpet surface. Once you selected a court, it was time to pick your player, as there were 32 of them to choose from that had short bios and stats consisting of serve speed and preferred surface. Yet, despite their appearances, none of them seem to be actual tennis players, so I'm curious who these face wraps belong to. Anyways, on to the actual gameplay. You have the serve mechanic that's a power bar, and the higher the power you had it at, the faster the serve, which was indicated with the speedometer on the left. Once the match is in place, you are able to lob, slice, topspin, or normally hit the ball and control the direction you wanted with the left stick. It took a bit of time getting the timing right, as there weren't any indicators, but after you got that down, you only had to focus on outsmarting the CPU, which brings me to the game's difficulty. By default, the game's on medium, which is pretty lenient on timing, and the CPU isn't always the brightest, but once I cranked it up to hard, it was an entirely different game. While I also turned up the game speed, it felt more akin to an actual tennis match, as ball placement actually began to matter. This became most apparent in tournament mode, which sees you going through a gauntlet of 5 opponents at different locations. I was only able to get to the 3rd round out of 5 before I got bounced, but I tried to get on medium, which saw me finally winning the trophy in a kinda underwhelming cutscene that features my player having a stroke. Now going into championship mode, it saw you selecting a country that was represented by 2 players and enter a tournament bracket where you had to win best of 5 in different singles and doubles configurations to advance. While singles in this game worked fine enough, doubles was a bit of a headache for a couple of reasons. Since the camera was locked unlike it was in singles, it was a bit difficult to understand depth. It became hard to be on the same page as your AI partner, and if you were the receiver's partner, majority of rallies ended up with your return bouncing out of the back. But even though I was able to get into the game, as the gameplay itself was okay, in general it felt pretty bare bones. There wasn't much of a presentation, no stats were kept of you after matches, movement was a bit glitchy, and it could have benefited from having actual player attributes to make them feel more unique, just to name a few issues. But to end on a positive note, I did appreciate how you could play with up to 4 players, along with you had the ability to change the game and set amount, which was pretty nice. So with everything taken into account, I'd have to give this game an unforced error out of 10. For our special 50th episode, I gave my communities a chance to pick the game through community choice, and I compiled the list live over on twitch.tv/KingCrown twice, but the actual game was selected like this.
After 67 entries from Instagram, 38 from TikTok, and 120 from YouTube, the game we'll be playing for episode 50 is Run with a Mad God! Yes! Yes, that's what I'm talking about!
Realm of the Mad God Exalt is a free-to-play MMO bullet hell that sees you traverse an open world to conquer enemies and dungeons, with the main twist being if you perish, your run is over, as this game features permadeath. To start, you pick between 5 starter classes, while others being unlockable once you reach the requirement goals. The game features a special and regular attack, different equipable items depending on your class, and potions that you could use. Stats in this game consist of attack, defense, speed, dexterity, vitality, and wisdom that can all be boosted in a variety of ways, like through items, potions, and exaltations. Once you're into the actual gameplay, you start at a main hub you can return to at any time, and you have a couple of different realms you can go explore. There's a wide variety of enemies you can come across that are either grunts, leaders, quest leaders, or open world bosses, but the most important thing to keep note of is the realm score, as the higher it is, the fewer enemies are left on the map before it's time to take on the realm boss. Realm boss battles consist of teleporting a max of 85 players to the realm boss's castle to fight through waves of enemies before slaying them and gathering some extra rare loot. Another cool mechanic was tiered dungeons that enemies would randomly drop, and its theme would depend on the enemy you just defeated. Now, focusing on the permadeath mechanic, when other players perish, you would receive a notification on the side of the screen, but if you were unlucky enough to see your end, all hope wasn't lost, as it did have its advantages. One advantage was the ability to carry over class exclusive items if you put them into your vault that you could use for your next character. Another was if you reached a max level of 20 before your demise, there was a good chance you unlocked another class you could now play as. And for more sentimental players, a graveyard was also kept to view all your fallen soldiers as a reminder to be more careful going forward. One last major portion of this game was its fame mechanic, as the more fame you had, the more stars you would earn, and the higher your fame became en route to achieving a legendary status. You could gain fame by completing quests and dungeons, and there is a global leaderboard that would keep track of the most famous players of all time. The game also featured some other things like enchantment, pets, and even an auto attack mechanic as a neat touch, but overall I felt the game had a pretty solid balance of being fun and difficult, but it did come with some small things like pushing for players to buy things with real world currency to fast track their progress. So with everything taken into account, I'd give this game a realm of good and lesser evil out of 10. Make sure to follow and leave a comment about what you think of this game, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Hopefully you enjoyed the compilation, but now that you've seen the games, let's do a little bit of trivia to test your knowledge. Question 1. What would roll across the screen as you played dodgeball in Penguin-Kun Wars? A sushi roll. B. Shinzo Abe. C. An old woman. D. A jelly bean. The answer is D. A jelly bean. Question 2. Which system did Xevious not release on? A. Sharp X1. B. FM7. C. Game Boy Advance. D. The Wii. The answer is C. Game Boy Advance. Question 3. What is the name of the Hong Kong developed Game Boy clone console that Canyon Racers was played on? A. Game Girl. B. Megaduck. C. The Wonder Swan. D. Sugar Baby Deluxe. The answer is B. Megaduck. Question 4. Which literature references the game played in episode 45, Crash and the Boys? A. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. B. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. C. Beck, Mongolian Chop Squad. D. Bocchi the Rock. The answer is B. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Question 5. What was the name of the fish we caught in Fish with Names? You see the answer choices, and Jerry is also there too. The answer is B. Whatever that says. Question 6. What was the name of Polanie's unofficial sequel? A. Night Shift. B. The Last Guard. C. Silencio Vogne. D. Dynasty of Slav. The answer is A. Night Shift. Question 7. What version is the Japanese exclusive of Shin Megami Tensei Devil Children? A. Black Book. B. White Book. C. Red Book. D. Gray Book. The answer is B. White Book. Question 8.
How many game variations did Snafu have in total? A. 16, B. 15, C. 12, D. 64. The answer is A. 16. Question 9. Which country could you not play as in Perfect Ace Pro Tournament Tennis? A. The United States, B. Kenya, C. Slovak Republic, D. Japan. The answer is D. Japan. And for our final non-multiple choice question worth 3 points, which company developed and published Tonpusu? The answer is Bandai. Well, that's all the time we have, but make sure to subscribe and leave a comment about what you think of the games, and I'll see you guys in the next one.